Welcome to TradeNBI.com. This is Jonas Reporters for the 12th of August. And, well, we talked about this above the 50% reasonable to be long. We had seen the steel crossing above science, so overtaking shorts in that standpoint, midterm buyers crossing above. All at the same time, new money was coming in around the 4th. We expect to start to see the potential of that. And off the sell-off, we had that immediate reversal, and we were looking for the potential of what we would call a delta D reversal, where you have the big sell-off, makes a new low, but is bought up immediately. We came right to that hard point of the 50% where it made it very easy, because above that 2880, it's like, well, you can be long from a daily construct. Particularly, we saw this on both the 5K and the 50K, buying on the return back up. And now we even have a new number, because we can look at the 61% line right there, which is at the 2916 level, which corresponds right around that 29.23 that we're at right here with the close. You got to stay above that level in order to be sustainable from a rally. Now, in this particular case, if we go back all the way over here to the last breakout, what you have to see is the continuation of green rising through this setup. Now, that steel hasn't made the peak above 13.5. It can still continue to rise a little bit further from there. So we would need to see that continuation for it to really follow through. And as you can see, we still don't even have yellow above magenta, which has to follow through as well in order for it to be a sustainable move. So the criteria become very easy for us to follow along. Even if we take a look at the 50K, we can see that it had bought back here, down at the 28.45 level, and then it exited right up here near the peak at the 29.23, which is exactly where we're at. It had another brief. Now, we wouldn't have liked this one under the new configuration, because we had the falling magenta and also no orange reset or anything, and certainly not even green above red at this particular point. So the fact that it then leveled out, regrouped, still didn't have the reset, but it did have a steel cross below cyan and then back above from a buy configuration in that standpoint. But then the green moving above cyan at this particular point made that a legitimate buy at that particular stage. So we'll see if it's able to maintain itself that way. You almost have cyan under red for a 50K. And actually, we should just look at the performance report, because I think that reached all-time equity highs right there. Yeah, new peak from that standpoint. So all in all, doing exactly what we expect. And when you think about the reductions that we would have in not having taken some of these other little small loss trades, those numbers are even more impressive when you look at it from that broader configuration. So all in all, that's really clean from that standpoint. So we can just follow along with that. Same thing here, a little bit better from NASDAQ standpoint, much further above the 61% Fibonacci lines at that particular. Doesn't quite have as well that green crossing over. Everything's pointing in the right direction, so we'll see how futures respond to the closing dip. Again, central banks fights between stronger dollar, weaker dollar. Eurozone just has a ton of problems that we're still holding up at these levels. Is amazing. This is the Fed at least keeping things somewhat in a positive light from a control standpoint. So we'll see if they're able to, who's going to win that battle. I bet on the Fed. They're going to keep trying to keep it at least at this level, if not higher. But if there's just continued selling because of Brent exit week, Eurozone, it's not going to be a whole lot, because if people are jumping back into dollars and fleeing euros, it can be a bit overwhelming. From an oil standpoint, back at the same threshold, nothing new from that standpoint. We got the oversold kind of bounce pop that you would expect when we get this deep on a DOC shakeout of that minus 20 in the D Omega here. We did get a dip below the red line, so even if this pops up, it's probably going to have to come back a little bit before it's able to build any momentum. But again, this is that excess supply capability we talked about, which is why we put a little less emphasis on oil than we used to, because of the U.S.'s dominance in removing OPEC. So this is where we have to turn to commodities like gold and even cryptocurrencies in a lesser standpoint, because they still haven't become transitional in the sense that they're broadly able to be liquidized. So gold being up at this peak, even without inflation or anything, is just the pent-up prospect of both the rising debt levels of most Western countries and the potential that at some point that's going to become unsustainable. So from an intraday standpoint, 5K, we started off just kind of like with a bunch of noise. We started to build. We got this first DOC spread here on a shakeout that was still well below that plus 15 for magenta and everything. And even with the steel crossover, by the time it came across here to produce the buy, never got the orange dip below. So that continued to fade. And then, of course, this dip, but coming so far after that crossover, doesn't have the momentum. So this is one of those where it's a little bit weak even on the secondary pivot of above 13. You kind of have to watch it, but the critical aspect for this was right here when the opportunity of the two to cross over at the meeting point. Kind of tough to put that one in there because they get so close, and then boom, the rejection, and by that point you're already back to the zero level, and then it just popped back down, made the new lows. At this point, produced another potential opportunity on this strong dip down, and it made a brief pop, got up to 38% before steel crossing below. You had green had been roiled underneath the red at that particular point. It was starting to pop up, but red had already started its descent down, and then that led to new lows where we started to build up, made the P2 coming right there, and so it was a much better shakeout. You'd seen the decent rise going through there, even though it still came back, retested the lows. Not uncommon with that kind of setup, and that was because we didn't get a strong green move over the cyan right there to suggest that buyers have really overwhelmed shorts completely. That happens a little bit later on, right here at the 38, the 29.05. So again, you're right at the pretty much the same levels right there. It happens right there at the close, the low, boom, right at the 29.05, and takes off from there. And in this particular case, even when you had the DOC spread there, all it was a fillback of these positive extremes, and then returned right back to the same buy configuration, came up, and then we got to the peaks. Now, the reason why this DOC spread wouldn't be so interesting is look at that magenta over the plus 15. Not a factor. You know that you're just going to get a light retrace within that, and then it kind of bounced around, and you're looking for continued weakness, but kind of mucked around a little bit. It still rose to new highs, and then you ended up with lower highs on these shakeouts with higher highs in price. So there's divergence right there. So the first one came in short. The difference was you had the strong steel move. Here you ended up with the secondary DOC spread literally at the same price, but in this case you had the declining steel at that particular point. And then it crossed over right there, didn't produce the dip below the red line. So even though that didn't come in there, you ended up with green overtaking cyan, so that gave enough of a push. It's battling back and forth at that particular point right now, so the open is kind of in flux at this particular stage. I think we have to let that one play out, but really good action as far as range and the ability to have us recognize it with the readings as they come through. So can't complain about anything that's happening this summer. It's been spot on. We're happy with all of the setups and readings that we've been seeing so far. So we'll just continue with it. If anything new and interesting pops up, I will certainly put it out there. As always, though, trade well. We'll talk to you later.